If you're a beginner looking to get your first camera or a new camera, it can be really overwhelming to find the right fit. And that's because a good beginner camera is very specialized for your shooting style. Which is why I made this video specifically to help out anyone looking to get their first camera or a new camera and show you what the best beginner cameras are and what specs and features you actually need as a beginner. Now, when people are usually looking for their first camera or a new camera as a beginner, they generally want to go as affordable as possible. But that usually means the quality of the camera isn't that great, and it usually lacks a lot of the key features a beginner needs for a good camera. But it is possible to get a camera that's both affordable and legitimately a good beginner camera, both in terms of features and image quality. And the first one being the best-selling camera in the world right now, and that is the Canon T7. This camera retails for only $399, brand new, with a lens, and this is the lowest price camera you can get right now, and it has been for the last 5 years. There is literally nothing cheaper. And if you want to pick up this camera, I'll leave links down below with the best pricing. Now, what makes the Canon T7 so good isn't just the price, but it's also the quality of the sensor. It has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is very similar in terms of sensor quality to the much more expensive Canon cameras like the Canon 80D and the Canon M50. So the image quality when shooting at the base ISO of 800 should be very, very close. And on top of that, the Canon T7 also has the same warm and rich Canon colors, which is what Canon cameras are known for. The colors straight out of the camera look amazing, and you almost don't need to edit these photos. But chances are, as a beginner, you're trying to learn photography, and editing is something you probably want to focus on. And the Canon T7 can also do 14-bit RAW, giving you the same amount of data and information capture in your photos as a pro camera. So you can edit the photos from the Canon T7 to your heart's content, and the T7 is a great camera to learn editing on. However, the Canon T7 won't be very good at high ISOs or low light conditions, because while it has a very similar sensor to the more expensive cameras, it does have a different processor. So at higher ISOs, you'll see quite a bit of noise in this camera. But stay tuned, because later in this section, I'll actually show you a workaround. Another really great thing about the Canon T7 is that the autofocus is fantastic in photo mode when using the optical viewfinder, which is the eyepiece that you look through to take photos. And good autofocus is a key thing to have when looking for a good beginner camera. And the body of the Canon T7 is very beginner friendly. It is a DSLR style body, but it's smaller than most DSLRs, and it's still very travel friendly. The battery life should last you for a few hundred photos before needing a recharge, so as a beginner, you could shoot on this camera for several days. And one thing about the T7 that beginners will love is that it actually has a mode dial with different scenes. This way, you can simply pick your shooting scenario on the mode dial and shoot away without having to think about the technicals of the camera. And the camera also has a built-in flash, because I know some of you guys like that flash look. Sadly, this camera does have some downsides. One of them being that it does not have a touchscreen, and the screen is also fixed, meaning you cannot tilt it up or down for high angle and low angle shots. This is a camera where you're really going to be using the optical viewfinder, meaning it's going to be stuck to your face most of the time, and this might not be how most of you guys like to shoot, especially if you come from cell phones. But other than that, the camera is really easy to just pick up and start using even without a manual. It's very beginner friendly. Another issue that some of you guys might run into is that the lens on the Canon T7 that it comes with isn't the greatest. It's totally fine for beginner photographers if this is maybe your first year of shooting. But I actually recommend buying another lens that's also very affordable that will massively improve your images. And the first one is the Canon EF 50mm f1.8. This lens is only about $100, but it will make your images so much better. And because it has a faster aperture, it will solve that low light issue that we talked about earlier. Second is the Canon EF 24mm, again, a very sharp lens with an f2.8. And this will also help improve your image quality, but also help you solve that low light issue. Now, so far, the Canon T7 seems pretty amazing, and that's because it is. But when it comes to actually taking photos, it only shoots at 3 frames per second. That might seem a bit slow compared to most modern cameras, but it's perfectly fine for beginner photographers that aren't shooting a ton of action, because chances are you guys are just shooting city landscapes, maybe a pretty car, or a couple of portraits. And 3 frames per second is actually not bad when you consider the fact that the T7 can shoot 115 JPEGs in a row or 11 raw photos, so you can shoot for a pretty long time before this camera needs a break. But if you want something that shoots a little bit faster, the other cameras on this list are probably a better fit for you. The Canon T7 is perfect for someone that's just starting photography and only cares about photography. This camera has all the baseline features you need to create incredible images. The sensor is great, the colors are fantastic, you get 14-bit RAW, and this is probably the best camera you can get if you're just learning photography and you just want to start creating beautiful images as easily as possible. But there's another camera that's almost as affordable as the Canon T7, produces phenomenal images, and also shoots faster, and that is the Sony A6000. The sensor in the A6000 is also a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, but the sensor has some really unique benefits. Because it's an older sensor, it almost has a vintage retro or film-like look to it that makes almost every single photo you take with it feel really special. And I absolutely love how the colors look straight from the camera. And the autofocus in the A6000 is also very fast and reliable, and you get good autofocus not only using the electronic viewfinder, but also the rear LCD screen, which the Canon T7 cannot do. And the reason the autofocus is so good is because the A6000 can shoot photos very, very fast. It can shoot up to 10 frames per second, which is basically triple the speed of the Canon T7, and you can also shoot for quite a long time with 47 JPEGs in a row, or 22 raw photos, which is basically double what the Canon T7 can do. However, there's a big hairy but. The A6000 also shoots raw photos, so you can edit the heck out of these photos. However, the RAW in the A6000 is only 12-bit RAW and not 14-bit RAW, which is the better version of RAW like the Canon T7. Now, you can still do a ton of editing with the A6000, but compared to the 14-bit RAW in the T7, you're missing about 20 to 25% in terms of flexibility and latitude. And if you don't need the super fast speed of the A6000 or the better autofocus, the T7 might be better for someone that's serious about their editing. But as a beginner, you might not even notice the difference. And the A6000 sensor also isn't very good at high ISOs or low light like most beginner cameras. However, if you want 14-bit RAW and better low light performance in the style and body of the A6000, you can actually upgrade to the A6400 for only about an extra $150 to $200 more. And the A6400 is way better than the A6000, not only in terms of photos, but also video, but it is more expensive, so I'm not really putting it on this list. And if you really want to get the best from your A6000, I also recommend picking up the Sony FE 50mm 1.8 lens for about $200, or a third-party lens from a company called Viltrox, the 20mm f2.8 lens for about $300 brand new. And these lenses will massively improve your image quality. The A6000 does have a pretty decent battery life with a few hundred photos on a single charge, but you might find that the battery drains a lot faster compared to other beginner cameras, so it's always good to have a few spares when it comes to the A6000. The A6000 is perfect for a beginner that wants to shoot fast for action shots, and maybe they want something even smaller than the Canon T7. The only downside of the A6000 is the 12-bit RAW. Now, if you want the best possible camera for a beginner photographer that literally has everything inside of it without any drawbacks, there's only one camera that fits that bill, and that is the Canon M50. And the Canon M50 is now more affordable than ever before. The Canon M50 has a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is very similar to the Canon T7. So you get the same great resolution, same fantastic Canon color science, and the overall look is pretty much identical with very small differences. But one of those differences is that the Canon M50 is much better in low light, and you can easily shoot this camera as high as 2000 or 3200 ISO with very little issues, and even 6400 ISO if you're okay with a little bit of grain. And on top of that, you also get 14-bit RAW, so you can really edit the heck out of your photos. And the Canon M50 has without a doubt the best autofocus on any beginner camera. It's fast, it's reliable, and you can both use it in electronic viewfinder and using the LCD touchscreen on the back. But on top of that, it also has face tracking and eye tracking with touch autofocus. Basically everything you could possibly need in the autofocus department. And one thing to note, there's actually two versions of the Canon M50. The only major difference being is that the M50 Mark II has about 30% faster autofocus, but other than that, the two cameras are very similar. And the Canon M50 also shoots photos super fast at 10 frames per second, but it only shoots 10 frames per second in RAW mode and 33 JPEGs, which is slower than the A6000, but the A6000 only shoots 12-bit RAW, whereas the M50 shoots 14-bit RAW, so in my opinion, the M50 is a better camera. Speaking of which, I have one with me. So the Canon M50 is a phenomenal camera for both action and sports. But the best thing about the Canon M50 is without a doubt the design. The M50 is super small. It literally fits in the palm of my hands. And the button layout and menu layout, like most Canon cameras, is phenomenal. But the best thing about this camera is that it also has a side articulating screen, which lets you do self-recording, but it's also great for high angle and low angle shots. And the touchscreen is also 100% touch sensitive. So if you wanted, you could just operate this entire camera only using the touchscreen and you don't have to use the buttons at all. And it's kind of like using a smartphone if that's what you're used to. And it also has a flash. On top of that, the battery life in the M50 is also pretty decent and you should get a few hundred shots before you need to recharge. Now, one thing I should mention, like most beginner cameras, the kit lens isn't the greatest. But because the M50 is technically discontinued, you could get very expensive, very pro-level lenses at a huge discount for this camera right now because it's technically discontinued, but there's plenty of places still selling this camera. I won't give a specific lens recommendation, but instead I recommend going out there and bargain hunting, and you can also use the Canon EFS lenses from their main lineup of cameras with this M50 using an adapter that's only about $50 to $80. There's a ton of options for lenses with the M50. The Canon M50 as a photography camera genuinely has no downsides. The only issue you might have is the fact that it's technically discontinued and you might have to compete with other buyers to actually get your hands on one. But if you want the best pricing on the Canon M50, I'll leave links down below and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.